And now for tonight's event, I'm very, very excited to introduce Jeff Chang. A quick bio. His first book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip Hop Generation, was called one of the best nonfiction books of the last quarter century. His latest, Water, Mirror, Echo, Bruce Lee and the Making of Asian America, was named one of 2025's best by Publishers Weekly, Alta, Vogue, Kirkus, and NPR. And he authored the award-winning Who We Be, A Cultural History of Race in Post-Civil Rights America, as well as We Gonna Be All Right, Notes on Race and Resegregation. He has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Guardian, San Francisco Chronicle, and many more. He is also the host of the Signal Award-winning podcast Edge of Reason and a KLW Public Media's podcast Notes from the Edge. So without further ado, welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie. It's so good to see you.
And this is your second, at least your second Stanford event, right? Because you did one on campus.
Yeah, we did one with the Institute for Diversity in the Arts, which is an amazing institute that I actually ran for about 7+ years during the 2010s, and that was an amazing night. But we would be remiss if we didn't mention that I started the tour with you and I in Brooklyn, right? And we got to talk about anime Wong and Bruce Lee all night, and that was an out of body experience. It was so much fun. It was a packed house. We had visuals. It was so much fun to be able to hang out with you and talk about two of our favorite Asian Americans in Hollywood. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, it was a dream of an event. I don't think that Bruce Lee and Anime Wong ever got to meet while they were living,
No.
but
Yeah,
at least we could join them spiritually through that launch event, which was really great.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I have a number of different questions for you, and so we'll have a discussion first, and then others who are tuning in, we'd love to get questions from you from the last 20 to 15 minutes of the event. But I thought we could just start with, like what was the impetus behind wanting to write a book about Bruce Lee, and also knowing just there's so much mythology out there about him. There are a lot of other books and kind of also just like pop culture, like folk stories about him. Like, his wife has written a book. I mean, a lot of people have their own takes on Bruce Lee. So what was the impetus for you to write this book and kind of put your own stamp on it?
It started pretty, you know, small key, really low key. Somebody had approached me, an Asian American editor actually, a while back, back when there weren't too many American editors in the industry. And I know you know all about this. This is your life. But this is like, yeah, a while back, and the editor was like, "Hey, you did this book on hip hop. You're an Asian American that did this book on hip hop. Do you think you could do something on Bruce Lee?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I could." And as it turned out, you know, it was from a different like publisher's insider baseball here, but it was from a different publisher, and so I had three other contracts that I actually had to finish before I could actually, you know, get this book going, and so it took a while actually. And during that time, a bunch of books came out about Bruce Lee. Um, and for me, I was like, oh, wow, like, what am I going to do? You know, you kind of have that crisis where you're like, is the book that I wanted to write even the book that I can do now? You know, and it was meant to be sort of this overall kind of the genre they call definitive biography, which is really like celebrity bio or that kind of thing. And, uh, and I wasn't really happy with even just that idea. But as it turned out, the pandemic happened, and that gave me a whole brand new focus on how to be able to approach the book, um, because it was so in our face. Like the pandemic and the violence that came with it,
Hmm.
really, I think, forced a lot of us. Um, I think we've probably talked about this before. Forced a lot of us who work in the arts to think about, well, what am I actually trying to do and say? And with Bruce, you know, it's about self-defense, right? It's about dealing with violence by stopping it before it really gets out of hand. It's about these questions of anti-colonialism. It's about questions of racism in Hollywood and racism in in everyday life, and so all of these questions kind of came up during that particular period for a lot of us, and Bruce came back as a symbol at that time as well, and so because of that, I kind of had, for I think worse, actually, I had a lot of fire to actually put together a book that would be not just about Bruce, but about the emergence of Asian America as well.
I love that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that the pandemic became this kind of galvanizing moment and a perfect moment to rediscover Bruce Lee. I mean, when so many of us were feeling, very hopeless about the way things were going. Um,
Did that happen for you too? I know you were working on the anime biography for a long time, but did that happen for you too? Because I just know there was a lot of Asian American artists who, during that particular time, were like, I need to say something. I need to say
mm.
something big. Did that happen for you too as you were writing?
Well, for me, actually, we sold the book about Anime Wong like 2 weeks before the shutdown.
Wow.
So it was happening in real time, and I think it took a few years, I think, before we got to this point where suddenly everyone felt very aware of what was going on for Asian Americans and Asians in this country.
Hmm.
And there was a kind of outpouring of support from book publishers, from studios, who wanted to suddenly produce stories about Asian Americans. And I had already sold my book before that, right? So my
Hmm.
husband said to me, "Oh, you should cancel your contract and try and sell it again to get more money."
Oh wow.
Obviously, I didn't do that, but that's a kind of cynical view on like people trying to capitalize on this terrible thing that was happening to our community. But yeah, I think, of course, certainly it infused the work with more significance, right? Of like wanting to help represent these important figures from our history.
Hmm.
And to that point, I think one of the things I really appreciate about your book is just how nuanced and insightful it is about who the real Bruce Lee was. I mean, you really peel back the kind of layers of this person who's become like a mythical hero to a lot of us. And like, I really loved the early chapters of seeing Bruce as a young man and how kind of awkward and nerdy he was, and also just like totally single-mindedly focused on kung fu, like to the point where it was like annoying the people around him. Um,
Yeah.
and so I'd love to just hear a little bit more about like what that process was like of really trying to get at the real person behind the myth.
Yeah. The original thought that I had going in, and this is way back, right, was I wanted to put Bruce back into his context, So I wanted to have Bruce walking through the world in real time and what he was dealing with and what the circumstances were. And I'll say, I was inspired in a lot of ways because I was looking at the history of Hong Kong after the Chinese, Civil War and the Revolution, and thinking a lot about like what Hong Kong must have been like for a young person then, you know, and comparing that actually in my head to what was happening in the Bronx in the late '60s and the early 1970s as hip hop was coming together, and just the sort of creative energies that are getting unleashed. I guess I'm drawn to a certain kind of story of kids from the outside and how they create this kind of culture that then takes over the world. I love those stories clearly. So I was trying to see about how to learn about the worlds that he was walking through, and that kind of shaded the way that I wanted to go into doing the research. So there's a lot of material that's out there about Bruce in the movies and Bruce in Hollywood and Bruce in martial arts and that kind of thing. But it was sort of the task that I wanted to set out to do was like, okay, but what did it feel like for him as a teenager, as a young person, even before that, who's like the son of one of the biggest actors in the colony. What did it feel like for him to be an immigrant, to come back to the US at the age of 18? I'm in Seattle now, actually. We came back today to do the unveiling of the Bruce Lee postage stamp, actually. Here's a little pin that they gave us and that kind of thing. So it
So
came out
incredible.
today. But it was wonderful because Linda, his wife was there. His former wife was, well, I mean, his wife was there, and also Linda's close friend who had actually brought her to meet Bruce and was the first women student of Bruce.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, yeah, and so like just to be in these surroundings with all these people who I got to meet and to understand the world that they were living in, and to be back in that here today. That was like the thing that I was kind of searching for at the beginning of trying to do that. I know you were working from papers and, you know, deep in the files and in the archives and that kind of stuff. I was lucky to be able to get, probably about 40 or 50 people, maybe more than that actually,
Wow.
who are still survivors who knew Bruce directly.
That's a lot
And
of
I was
people.
yeah, it was good enough to do a almost 600-page book. But the amazing thing about it was a lot of them, like most of the books that are out there about Bruce are, if they're not by Linda or Shannon, his daughter Shannon Lee, they're by folks who knew him in martial arts. So they knew
Hmm.
him on the fight floor, but they didn't necessarily know him when he went home. Um, and and it goes without saying that a lot of the books are not written by Asian Americans. And so over time, I'd meet Sue Ann, and Sue Ann would be like, "Well, you should talk to this person, like my brother, or you should talk to and I got to meet many other folks, and so I got to talk to a lot of his closest friends who are Asian Americans, and they were able to kind of talk about um, what it was like, what he was like in the community that he was living in here in Seattle, and then of course in Oakland and in Los Angeles as well. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it comes through in the book. It's such a human treatment of who he was, which I really loved. Speaking of immigration, which you touched on a little bit, I think it would be, we've talked about this, and also immigration is top of mind given what's going on in this country right now with all of the ICE raids. So I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about um, Bruce's story of being born in the U.S., how that came to be, and then when he comes back as a teenager. I think that's also a really interesting period in his life, right? Because he's suddenly in an American context, which is so different from being in Hong Kong.
absolutely. Yeah, so he was, I mean, what folks would now refer to as an anchor baby, which is sort of this derogatory term um, about, you know, undocumented immigrants who supposedly are coming to the U.S. in droves to have their babies so they can be American citizens, which is, it's more mythical than real. Um, and and what had happened was his parents were there in Hong Kong on the verge of war, right? Like the Japanese were already sweeping across China. Um, Everybody in Hong Kong was just waiting for the day that the bombers would, be hitting Hong Kong, and and at the same time, there's this massive effort to raise funds for the defense of the nation. So his parents are thinking, I think, about what that means, like impending war. Like, are we going to be shut down for years? And so they decide to take this big risk, which is take on this tour in the U.S., which Chinatown organizations in the U.S. would arrange for these opera companies to come and play. They come in through San Francisco. They'd go to the different places. They go to Seattle. They go to New York to play, and they would, spend a couple of months, but they would make enough money to really come back and live for a few years. So they decided to take this big risk to actually go to the U.S. As the sort of clouds of war are gathering, and do this tour. And in the midst of that, Bruce's mom gets pregnant, and they're there for months, anyways, right? Because back then they're having to take trains from, you know,
Hmm.
the Bay Area to Los Angeles and from LA to New York and that kind of thing. Um, and so Bruce is born. He's born in the U.S. He's born in a Chinese hospital in San Francisco, Chinatown, which of course was famously started because they wouldn't allow Chinese Americans to go into, you know, white hospitals, mainstream hospitals. That's where he's born, and he, the family is in the life of Chinatown. In fact, Bruce is brought in to be in a movie that's made in this sort of Cantonese cinema circuit that stretches from San Francisco to Hong Kong to South China to Singapore, Philippines, and that kind of thing. He's there as an infant at like a few weeks old in that movie. Um, but then they go back, and then of course on December 8th, the Japanese invade Hong Kong, and everything changes for them. And Bruce almost starves to death in many ways. He's a very sickly child, but he grows up to be a fighter and a cha-cha dancer and a movie star, actually in his own right. And he gets into one too many fights because he just loves fighting. So his parents are like, "Nah, we're cutting you off. We're putting you back on the boat. Your selective service thing is coming up anyway. You're about to be 18, so you've got to reassert your American citizenship." Uh, and so they send him back to the U.S. So he comes to the U.S. and he's I think scared. He has flunked all his English courses, at his private school, and he in the run up to leaving is just in the library and reading all these books, and he's reading like British martial arts pamphlets, he's to study his English, and he's reading all kinds of things to kind of get up for that. And he brings along with him like this book of American colloquialisms. That was just a major thing for me to be like looking at this book that he had marked up, and like just regular everyday phrases, and he's having to learn these weird colloquialisms that Americans use. And so he comes back to the U.S. and he's an immigrant, and he's sort of plunged into this environment and living as an immigrant would. So it's interesting because he's born American, but then he also has to learn how to be American. And I think that that's what happens to him when he's 18, 19 years old. First in San Francisco and then here in Seattle, which is where he does most of that growing up over the next 5 years. Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, he's kind of gaining this new consciousness that he's like different from other people in America, right? I mean, I think that was one of the things that you could see his anger at the way that people would stereotype him or say, use slurs and call him names. Um, and you can kind of see like the fire that he has later in his career start then.
Yeah, totally. He's like sitting in a car with Taki Kimura, one of his best friends, who had been incarcerated, right, in 1942 because of Executive Order 9066, and who's much older than Bruce and who has kind of lost all of his confidence.
Mm.
So Bruce, in some ways, Taki is somebody that he really feels deeply for, and they develop this really close friendship. But Taki is also teaching him about racism in the U.S. So they leave Taki's groceries. His family runs a green grocery, and they leave the supermarket one day, and they pull out on the road, and Bruce is driving, and he's not a great driver. He's just. This is one of the stories that everybody tells me. I'm like, he's not a great driver, and I was trying to be like, okay, Asian driver. I don't know if I want to lead into this, but he's not a great driver, and so a cop pulls in behind them. And he and Taki are telling jokes and laughing, and the cop pulls up against the window, and he's like, "Oh, you guys think it's funny, huh?" And Bruce immediately balls up his fists and wants to punch the guy in the face. And Taki's like, "No, we don't do that here. You're not going to end up just under the jail. You're going to end up dead under the jail." And so Bruce has to learn all these kinds of things. And he learns his first student is a Black American, Jesse Glover, who as a child is literally beaten senseless by police and is holding on to this feeling of unsafe, of not being safe in his own body, and has been looking for
Hmm.
a teacher. He's older than Bruce as well, but when he sees Bruce perform, he like literally follows Bruce all around to try to get him to teach him. And these are the people he's hanging with. He's hanging in the segregated neighborhoods, in the Central District, where it's just blacks and Japanese Americans and Filipino Americans and poor whites, Latinos, Native Americans, and that's his crowd, and that's, I think, how he learns to become the underdog. Like that's where he builds this, I think, real underdog type of energy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny that you say that Bruce was a bad driver, because Anna Mae Wong was also
Enemy
a
one, I
bad
was gonna,
driver.
yeah.
She totaled at least one car, if not, and tried to beat the cops that were after her for speeding.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
In Los
so
Angeles, no less.
yes, and in Los Angeles. But no, it has nothing to do with the fact that they're Asian. They're
Yeah,
just bad drivers.
they're Asian
Uh,
star bad drivers, bad Asian star drivers, Asian American star
Something.
drivers. Yeah, something. I don't know.
Or
We'll have to
maybe it
do
has
the
to
weekend.
maybe it has to do with the fact that they're both dragons and that they think maybe they own the road, or who knows.
Yeah, or maybe just, I don't know. People in the chat can tell us, but maybe dragons are bad drivers. I don't know. Like
Maybe.
I don't know. I'm not going to
Maybe.
cast aspersions on dragons because I know that could be.
Um, so as I think people can tell from the conversation already, the your book is so much more than just a biography of Bruce Lee. I mean, it says it in the subtitle, The Making of Asian America. And so it's about Asian American history, but it's also about Asian history, about what's going on both sides of the Pacific. So it's really expansive in that way. And I was just curious how you went about figuring out like which pieces of context and history you wanted to bring in to the book. And I mean, because there's, of course, I'm sure you could have kept going if you wanted to. But how did you think about bringing in those other histories and stories?
Such a good question. And I could ask the same question of you too, right? We're talking about Anime Wong getting turned down for Good Earth and then going on her China tour. That part was it's so fascinating and it's so deep and it plays into a lot of what's happening as well diplomatically, right, between China and the US at the time,
Hmm.
against the backdrop of like sort of Japanese imperialism and that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, I I had to kind of limit the story because certainly my curiosity took me into a lot of places that probably wouldn't have made sense to have covered. But it was really important to be able to talk about the revolution, talk about the mass migration, talk about how that changed Hong Kong, and then even to think about Hong Kong as it developed, right, from like a place where infant mortality was huge, right? Like we're talking 1 in 3 babies, I think, in the
Hmm.
1930s and the 1940s, like into the early 1950s, where Bruce is still a child. Thinking about all these kinds of issues, and then thinking about Hong Kong as believing in itself as a rising power and using that as a cultural force in the 1970s. So I think that like that kind of stuff was really important to be able to talk about. And of course, Bruce breaks in to the US consciousness in 1972, which is the year that Nixon goes to China. And he is turned down for the role of the TV series Kung Fu, just months before Nixon goes to China, and as Kissinger is doing a lot of these visits with Zhou Enlai to kind of do the advance work for that. And Chinese kung fu movies are at the same time taking over all of Asia. So it's important, and as they're taking over Asia, these debates are coming out about him being too violent. So the
Mm.
same stuff that I encounter when we're talking about so-called gangster rap in Los Angeles in the 1980s. But this idea that this art is causing people to riot or to rise up in rebellion in anti-colonial anger or intergenerational kind of anger, or even ethnic, rioting. And Bruce being like, no, that's not like, you think this is violent? Like, the reason that kids are coming, the reason that young people are coming to the theaters for this is because the world all around them is violent. We're talking about the escalation of the war in Vietnam at the same time, and all these kinds of anti-colonial riots and youth rebellions that are happening. So it was really important to be able to kind of talk about that as well, and then that allows us to also to set the stage to talk about what happens in the U.S. with the Third World Movement, leading to the Third World Strike in the Bay Area, and how these things actually end up converging, by 1973 when Into the Dragon comes out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of Bruce's films,
Mm.
well, one thing that's similar again between him and Anna May Wong is that they were trying to make it in Hollywood and realized just kept hitting a wall, right? Could only play supporting roles. I mean, he's in the Green Lantern, but he's wearing a mask. He has almost no lines. And so uh Bruce, like Anime, realizes they have to go outside of the US to get their career jump started. And so he goes back to Hong Kong, makes these films that become like, huge blockbusters, right? And like he's kind of like the prodigal son has returned, right? And now he's become a big star. And which is I think a really interesting, and that eventually allows him to make Enter the Dragon, which is like a co-production between a Hollywood studio and Hong Kong. Um, so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about maybe some of the differences between the films that he made in Hong Kong versus Enter the Dragon. And I don't know to what extent Game of Death this might apply to, but like if there's a difference in the type of role and character that he's given based on who's making the film.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first two movies, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, um, are films that he doesn't write. They are film vehicles that are given to him by Raymond Chow, who is a breakaway producer from the Shaw Brothers empire. And so they're trying to establish themselves as like a player in this. And the idea is to bring Bruce in sort of as the beginning of creating this stable of stars that he can rely upon to make these amazing movies that will compete directly with the Shaw Brothers movies. And so as he's doing that, the roles at that particular point are very interesting. In The Big Boss, he plays sort of this upstart immigrant who comes to Thailand to work with these Chinese migrant workers who are living in a company town where, on the surface they're selling ice blocks, which like seems so archaic now, but they're selling ice blocks. But the guy is really making money. The Big Boss is really making his money off of the packets of heroin that he's stuffing in these these big blocks of ice. And so when that's discovered, all bets are off, and he is he first defends the laborers against the Big Boss, and then the Big Boss tries to court him, and so he turns on them slightly, and he misses the moment at which the Big Boss goes in and massacres all of his coworkers and friends, and so that drives him to actually avenge their deaths. So he's a labor organizer in a way, you could say, right? And the next movie, he's an anti-colonial.
Hmm.
He's working in Shanghai that's occupied by Japan. As he's not working, he's part of a kung fu kun, and his heroic Sifu has been killed. So these are really like resistance movies, right? And they reflect what's happening in Hong Kong and all across the Southeast Asia. There's labor strikes. right? There's like anti-colonial messaging in all these kinds of movies. When he makes his own movie with a third movie, Way of the Dragon, which is called Return of the Dragon in the U.S., um, he needs to write a story, and he ends up writing a story about the immigrant experience. So he goes to Italy to actually protect these workers in a Chinese restaurant from a mob boss who's trying to take over this neighborhood and gentrify it. It's like an
Hmm.
anti-gentrification tale. It's pretty wild, right?
Yeah,
And so this
yeah.
is Bruce. Bruce is establishing himself as the hero of the underdog. And he starts to make this movie Game of Death, which we will never know what the full plot might have been. But my guess is probably it would have been having, pacing him in the same type of situation. Now, when you get to Enter the Dragon, the script is written for him, but he's wanting to do it so badly. He wants to break back into the U.S. that he takes it. And the irony is that when he had first come into the industry, he had been pitched by the producer as going up for a part where he'd play an Oriental James Bond. He was going to play number one son of Charlie Chan, and he was going to retool it, right? Because James Bond was huge at the time, to have him be like this sort of spy gadget type of thing, right?
Hmm.
Of course, ABC didn't want an Asian lead, and this is really important. ABC didn't want an Asian lead, Asian American lead, and so they don't even take the show up, but they make him like the number two for the Green Hornet. So he's the driver for the Green Hornet. He's sort of the strong, silent type. They don't give him any lines, and this is like part of what incites in him this wanting to go back. And so, before he goes to Hong Kong, he actually is up for the part in Kung Fu, and they deny him because they're like nobody's going to understand his English, right? And they basically turn down the guy who has popularized Kung Fu as a martial art in the
Right.
U.S. and who all of his fellow Asian American actors are like, we're not going out for that part. That's his part. Like that's made for him. And of
Hmm.
course, they turn him down and they give it to David Carradine, who plays it in Yellowface, and kind of stoops around. But my point is when you get to Enter the Dragon, the script is written as a James Bond movie. The producers don't have any faith that he can carry it by himself, so they give him a black co-lead and a white co-lead, and Bruce has to fight the studio like every step of the way to be able to make sure that he's going to be the actual lead, one, and that two, that he's not going to be portrayed in this sort of orientalist type of film that he's going to be really embarrassed about, and that people like in Hong Kong and Southeast Asia are going to watch and be like, that's horrible, which is actually what happened, right? People ended up watching the movie and they wanted to see Bruce, but they have to deal with all this weird like banquet like orientalist, like stuff, right?
Yeah.
Pigeons in cages and that kind of stuff, and there's
Dancing
great clothes on
girls or
dancing
yeah.
girls, and then this villain who's literally named Han, right? Which is like the Chinese like ethnic, like the
Right.
largest Chinese ethnic group.
The biggest
So people
insult.
in right, so people in Hong Kong are watching this and going like, "Oh, this is horrible," right? But in the U.S., because it's kind of hitting this third world moment, you
Hmm.
know, that sort of three the hard way kind of lead thing with Bruce taking up the lead in that, and the scenes at the beginning where he's actually shown like fighting Sammo Hung, and then he's talking to his Sifu, and then he is the Sifu in turn to a student, like,
Hmm.
and he's able to establish like a framework where he can drop these ideas of Asian philosophy, Taoism and Zen Buddhism onto like these audiences. All of those he had to fight for. He actually didn't show up for the first week of filming until the producers are like, when's he going to show up? And Linda had to tell him, until you guys put these scenes back in the movie, he's not showing up anymore. He's gonna quit his own movie, and they're like, okay, fine, he gets it. And then the mirror scene becomes this sort of metaphor, this sort of meta metaphor for Asian representation and Asian American representation in Hollywood, right? Once you destroy your illusions, you can see the enemy clearly, and you can you can move forward and stuff. And that's the Hall of Mirrors um, fight scene, which I think that he adds a lot to in a lot of different kinds of ways. I think he spends most of the time directing that and directing the scenes that they shoot that are added to the beginning of the movie. So he's able to make the movie palatable and specifically Asian American in many ways by forcing himself and forcing the issue, with the Hollywood folks.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's the amount of self, advocating that he had to do and fighting just to even get the film made, right? I mean, it's really incredible and impressive and like an achievement that that has gone lasted many many decades, since his passing. I was interesting to hear you talk about it because I think the first film that I saw of his was Enter the Dragon, and then I went back and watched the early Hong Kong films and then watched Enter the Dragon again and realized, oh yeah, this is kind of like not as interesting as the other
Yeah,
ones. It
yeah,
doesn't have that I mean, I guess there's a little bit of an underdog narrative, but there isn't that kind of I mean, there's a little bit of a resistance, but it's not the same. And in those Hong Kong films, he's really kind of like a spunky, zany character. He has a lot of personality. He's much more human. Whereas in Enter the Dragon, he's kind of this very stoic,
yes,
like assassin-like,
yes.
kung fu master. And yeah, so it's really interesting to kind of see the contrast between those films. So I have one more question for you before we'll open it up to the audience. Hopefully, people have questions. If you do, you feel free to drop them in the chat, or we can get to them once we're done with this question. But so I guess along with this conversation, I've been thinking about, a lot of times I feel like other people have described Bruce Lee as being arrogant.
Mm.
And maybe sometimes, he was. But it also comes from a place of like this incredible confidence and self-belief, which is what made his career possible, right? If he had doubted himself, then we wouldn't be here talking about him. So I just love to hear you talk a little bit about that. And I mean, like, is that a character flaw? Is that a strength? Is it both?
We talked about this too, like anime and Bruce both being dragons, and this sort of like my way or the highway type of vibe. this you called it main character energy, and I just love that. And that
Yeah.
should be the title of our panel. And it's interesting because the thing that really struck me the most as I was doing the research was how vulnerable he actually felt. Like to the outside world, he presented himself as cocky, as sort of like sure of himself, as like incredibly confident, and uh, the actual the Hollywood director for Enter the Dragon, Robert Klaus, actually said we have to kick the strut out of this guy, like we have to like basically cure him of the strut. He's walking around with a strut, you
Wow.
know, and yeah, and
I
when you
mean,
think
why would
about
you,
that
how
now,
would,
right?
yeah, I mean, how would you ever say that about a leading man? He's supposed to have a strut.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But maybe not Asian men, right? Not Asian
Right.
American men.
Right.
Like his number one patron in Hollywood was a guy named Sterling Silliphant, who's one of the most important, screenwriters of that particular time, certainly one of the most successful. He never thought Bruce could be a lead. He thought Bruce
Mm,
would always play a supporting character, and so he kind of had to have that sense and that what you call it arrogance or that kind of thing to be able to do it. But what was clear to me was that the last year of his life that took a huge toll on him. There was literally a letter that I got to read where he was writing this letter, and he wrote these letters and he kept them to himself, almost as a way to sort of psych himself up, to get him like to get himself hyped. But he also wasn't sleeping. Like Linda would see him in his study very late at night because he was like stressing over every detail. He was trying to make sure that everything would be just right. And he wrote this letter where it's like, this is my moment, basically, he said. And it's like, I like have to do this, and it's my time. But as you actually read the letter, you can see his handwriting tailing off.
mm.
like he's like falling asleep almost as he's writing it. Like he's completely exhausted. His friends during the last like couple months of his life are like, man, this guy's just being like really short temper with us. You know, he's like getting into arguments with us all the time. You know, and Linda's like, he's not sleeping. And if you talk to his friends now, they're like, yeah, you know, he died, and there was a big inquest into like what he died of. He literally died, they say, because he put himself all the way out there to get this made the way that he needed to get it made. Um, and you know, I remember that. I didn't want to overplay that or overstate it in the book. There's a way of being kind of melodramatic about it. There's a lot of things that were kind of going on in that last year of his life, um, but it is important to note that, you know, he had dedicated himself fully to the goal of being able to make a movie that would make Asian Americans and Asians proud. And I think that, you know, he was able to do that in a lot of ways. As flawed as an
Yeah.
American can be, I think he was able
No,
to
I
do
mean, I
that.
think you did do that. I mean, I think it's sad for all of us that it came at such a great cost.
Yeah,
But clearly he understood the stakes of that whole project.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's open it up to the audience. I think we have a question already from Ahmed. So Ahmed asks, while you were doing your research and writing your book, what did you learn about how other Asian American leaders, thinkers, and artists were influenced by Bruce and have built on his legacy?
Oh, wow,
Great
that's a
question.
good question. Yeah. So there's this two-part answer to that. The first is that in the beginning, you know, as Asian Americans were naming themselves Asian Americans and sort of establishing this like intense radical movement on not just the East Coast and the West Coast, but also in the Midwest, and like really coming out as Asian Americans and saying we're proud to be Asian. Like we're not Orientals, we are Asian American, naming themselves that. When people like talked about Bruce in the beginning, it was like, oh yeah, that's that guy that was playing the sort of Stepin Fetchit role on the Green Hornet. But when they saw Fists of Fury, um, the the same reaction, you know, happened in Chinatown in San Francisco. People were describing it to me as had happened in Hong Kong. Like in Hong Kong, Nancy Kwan likes to say that they tore out the seats when they saw Bruce, like, you know, kicking down that sign and saying no dogs and Chinese allowed.
Mm,
Um, and the same kind of thing happened like in like Chinatown at the theater that was right across the street from the International Hotel. For those who know what I'm talking about, they see that scene, and literally like Asian Americans, Chicano, like African Americans, like white radicals are all just cheering. They're hooting and hollering. They're jumping out of their seats. And so he becomes a hero after that, you know. And as you look back on his work now, I think it's changed, you know. And so obviously Bruce is like the most well-known Asian American, like who's probably ever lived, right? And
yeah.
obviously he's influenced the entirety of not just martial arts film but action film. Um, and I think what I was trying to recover in this particular book was the sense of what that meant, like post 1973, you know. And it's a mixed bag, right? Because on the one hand, we just talked about he has this huge breakthrough, he dies, and then it's another generation until his son Brandon can hit the big screen. It's another generation until we get like Margaret Cho as a lead on a TV show, right? It's like
Hmm.
20 years from 1973 to 1993, a generation. Then Brandon is like horribly, you know, taken away as well, and then we wait like a literally another generation to get to like fresh off the boat and everything everywhere all at once, which is, I think, like in some ways everything everywhere all at once is sort of like the movie that should have come just after Enter the Dragon. You know, it couldn't
Hmm.
have, but the point is, it's taken us like two generations to be able to get to
Yeah.
this particular point. And I think that at this particular point, if you talk to any Asian American actor, if you talk to any Asian American artists, they're contending with with the shadow of Bruce Lee, or they're building off of the breakthroughs of Bruce Lee and Anime Wong, right? And and so it's a type of thing now where you can't Dev Patel, right, makes
Mm.
a movie. He's like, all I ever wanted to do was to be Bruce Lee, um, Kumail Nanjiani, right, like turns into a superhero because he loved Bruce Lee as well. So yeah, so it really is the type of thing where we all kind of yeah, we all kind of are grappling with, I think, what anime broke down the doors for, and then Bruce was able to kind of, move to the next level. We're all kind of dealing in that particular history and spectrum of um, of representations.
Yeah. A few years ago, the last time I was in Seattle, I was able to go and visit Bruce and Brandon's grave. And it was, I was so impressed with the fact that, well, I couldn't get a moment alone
Yeah,
with the grave number
yeah, you
one.
can't. You never will. We were there in the rain like a few months ago. It was pouring. There was still a crowd there. Yeah,
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 and it was just people of all different stripes, different races, ethnicities, ages, genders, and I was just really like astounded at like all these people were making the same pilgrimage to pay their respects to him. And a lot of them were like, it wasn't just like, look at the grave, take a photo and leave. It was like, no, like I'm going to hang out here for a half an hour and kind of commune with this person who means something to me. And I just think that that kind of legacy is so incredible.
yeah. If I can tell you, we were at this unveiling for the postage stamp today, and it was at the Nippon Kan Theater, right at the edge of where Yesler Terrace and Chinatown International District kind of intersect. So literally, like where in the Nihon Machi neighborhood, literally where the Japanese American, Black American, and Chinese American like communities all kind of converged, and to be in there like standing room only, like lots of folks just walked in off the street, and then to see the lines of folks and generations of folks, and uh, like you said, all kinds of backgrounds, and everybody was touched by him in some kind of a way, And I think it wasn't lost on the crowd either today, just how important he feels like in this particular context. He was an American because of birthright citizenship, and he was an immigrant. Even though he was born in the U.S., he remigrated, and just in this particular moment, post pandemic, he's a symbol, I think, of solidarity, of unity, of power, of fighting for justice,
Hmm.
and and people were really feeling that today. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like the satisfaction of watching him kick somebody's ass in a movie, I mean,
Absolutely.
it just doesn't get any better than that because that's not something we can all do in our normal daily lives.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and that's the stamp, right? He's about
Yeah.
to kick some ass, so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's super exciting. So
Yeah.
the stamp is available now, right? As of today, or
Today was the day that it was unleashed on the public. Yes. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So we've got a few more minutes. I mean, if other people have questions from the audience, let's see. Oh, there is another question here. Okay. Oh, this is from Linda, Linda Tran. So she asks, what has been the reaction response to your book from Bruce's family members or others who are close to him?
So Linda hasn't read the book yet. Shannon did, and it was a tough read for her. Bruce, her father passed away when she was 4.
Yeah.
And uh, his friends, even her mom, they talked about things like Bruce was not. He was complex. He wasn't always heroic. He like wasn't the best like baby parenter. you know, um, there were a lot of like things that I think it might have been hard for her to read. We talked about it a lot, um,
Mm.
and um, and yet all of that, and the fact that he made it possible for us to be, thinking about Asian American representation in a completely different way. They're all true at the same time. Um, so it's been a beautiful thing. I come from the school of writing where it's not about like there's a school of writing that's about you're going to betray your subjects at some point. It's the journalist and the murderer
Mm.
analogy, and I just think that that's not how I was raised. You know, it was very important for me to be able to make sure that Shannon could read the draft before, like I filed it. And it was very important for us to be able to kind of work through like what are the differences, and what are the things. And she from the beginning, she said, "I'm not gonna like look over your shoulder. Here's the keys to the archives, but I'm not
Wow.
gonna look over your shoulder." And so it was like incredibly generous of her, and it was also incredibly generous of her to read the book and give me her hard critique of it, and then for her at the end of the day also to be like, but this is the story you're telling, you know. So I just I have so much love for them and for that, and we had a thing here at the Wing Luke in November, and I might get emotional talking about this, but um, what she said, we were talking to a crowd and we were talking a little bit about this process that we were talking about. And she said, look, like this is a period where we don't necessarily, I'm paraphrasing it, she said it much more eloquently, where it's not important to be like trying to, I don't know, preserve some sort of a heroic narrative, that's like he did no wrong or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But it but it is important for us to be able to understand what he stood for, and I think that's something where I was always with her from the very beginning, and we still share that, and so yeah, so we've got a really great friendship. We can tell each other the truth, and I don't know if she's gone back and reread the book and that kind of thing. But uh, yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be able to be a writer who doesn't feel like you have to sell out people in order to be able to
Right.
tell the truth. You know?
Yeah. No, I really like the way you put that because I think I have never articulated it that way for myself, but that's how I also felt writing about anime Wong. I mean, of course, I wanted
Yeah.
to be truthful, right? I
Yeah.
wasn't going to hide things, but at the same time, it was hard for me not to be sympathetic to her situation and try to understand like what it must have been like to be her, right? And that's, I mean, that's ultimately what you are trying to do with the biography, right? Is tell people something about their existence. Okay, so we've got a few other comments here. Um, Ahmed asks, did Bruce and Anna May meet each other? Do you have details? We were just actually talking about this before the event.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that they ever met,
They
but
did. Yeah.
I think that Anime might have met his parents when
Mm.
she was in Hong Kong in the 1930s, in 1936. So I think it's possible she might have met them in something like that. Um, but I don't
Before
think
he
that,
was born. That's
yes.
that's intriguing. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because he was one of the Lee Hoi Chun was one of the Chosang. He was one of the famous comedians. Uh,
Mm,
the like he was one of the very famous comedians. So that makes perfect sense to me. That would have been 4 years
yeah.
before he was born. Um, we did
Yeah.
get when we were up here in Seattle. We did get a question at the event, which was, "Did Bruce Lee and Jimi Hendrix ever meet?" Um,
Oh.
yeah, and so Bruce and Jimi Hendrix were literally living like very close to each other at exactly the same time. Um, and there's a sort of like story. There's sort of this. it's sourced in Charles Cross's book, but he says that they met at a bowling alley in the Central District. And just to hear that, just kind of, it sort of blew my mind. Can you imagine, like, if
Seeing
Anthony
them both
Wong
at a
and Bruce
bowling
Lee,
alley.
yeah, like had met at a bowling alley, or if Jimi Hendrix, even Jimi Hendrix and Bruce Lee meeting at a bowling alley, like, wow, worlds
It's
colliding. It's so
crazy.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, the image
yeah.
is pretty unforgettable.
Yeah.
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 Um, okay, so we have a comment from Linda that I'll just read before we wrap up. She just says, "Thanks for hosting the virtual talk." She couldn't focus and enjoy as much on about your on-campus event because I think she was helping to organize that
Yeah.
event.
Yeah.
And she just said, "I love the connections between both of your book subjects. Wonderful job. Thank you. Appreciation to you both." Well, thank you, Linda, for tuning in.
Thank you so, so much.
Thank you to everyone who's been here. And of course, most of all to Jeff, thank you so much for coming to speak to us about your book.
Thank you, Katie.
Um, Always
I
fun to
think,
chat.
yeah, and everybody, you need to get Not Your China Doll. You have to read this book. It's incredible. It's so good. And it's just a page turner. It's the kind of thing where we picked it up and couldn't put it down. It's just so amazing. It's
Well,
beautifully
that is
written. And
so sweet of you to say.
if you, I think of my book now as a sequel to yours in some ways.
Yeah, well,
It's
I
such
was just gonna
continuity. It's
say
such amazing, like, yeah,
they make a really good package together. So if you want to
yeah.
really dive into your Asian American film star history, yeah, I totally agree with that. You can start with anime and end with Bruce Lee, and that kind of covers you for the 20th century.
I think so. I think it really does. Yeah. If you love somebody and it's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month,
Or it's Lunar New Year.
other than New Year, exactly. Like, get them both. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean that's what I did. I got a copy of your book from our event that you signed and sent it to my older brother, who's always been a huge Bruce Lee fan. So it
Thank
does
you.
make a good gift. Well,
Thank you.
thank you again for being with us tonight, Jeff, and happy Lunar New Year.
Happy Lunar New Year. Happy Year of the Horse, the Fire Horse.
Yes, happy Year of the Horse. All
All right.
right.
Take good care.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.